Hello everybody, Greg Twig here. We're going to be looking at a quick little run through of how to render out a project with an alpha channel for use in maybe video editing applications like Premiere or Final Cut, or sending off to someone else who you might be sharing a project with or dealing with further on down the pipeline. In the project that we're using, you should see a folder that is called Providence, and there's two compositions in here. One of them's feet. The feet are merely, oh, there we go, a very simple animation of these two baby prints coming onto screen, and this is nested into my lower third design. So where we want to be is lower third, but just so you can make sense of how I put this together, you should know that the feet comp is a nested comp with a certain animation happening inside of there. So here we see the feet come up, and then we've got a little text treatment with a little blur and whatnot, and then very subtle movement of the name and the sub name, or the position title. And this is intended to be overlaid on top of video for a project. Okay, so right now it looks like that it's being created on black just because the transparency grid is not activated. So in the composition window, if I activate my transparency grid, now things look a little bit different, and you should be accustomed to a transparency grid from your work in Photoshop and Illustrator, and probably even here at some point you've clicked on it or opened a project that was already set to have the transparency grid shown. So whether or not the transparency grid is active doesn't matter, because the only content right now that are producing any pixels whatsoever are the text and then the little baby footprint animations. Everything else has no instructions to activate pixel information, so it's going to be completely transparent. This is your alpha channel. Okay, so the alpha, meaning dominant pixels, that's where we see the color and the text. Everything else will be completely transparent. Now, to render out a movie, to maintain that transparency, there is only one simple trick basically you have to pay attention to when you're going through the rendering process. But before we get there, I'll just say that why would you render out something with an alpha channel, you might be asking. Well, it's helpful for an editor who's working on something if you're supplying graphics and they need to be able to just get the information like a lower third or a logo or something like that, to be able to work with their footage so that they don't have to fuss with it, right? So a rendered movie with the alpha channel present should just pop right into timeline and be ready to fly. The other reason you might start to pick up on here is that it can be really helpful for you in your own internal workflow in After Effects. So there might be some heavy effects and filters or lighting effects or whatever 3D stuff going on that is very processor intensive, and if you felt like you got to a point where an element was ready to be used in your project in like another comp or nested into it, whatever, you could ultimately render yourself out that asset with alpha active and just bring it right back in your project and replace the layers with something that is actually rendered. That way the computer doesn't have to process those effects or those 3D lights or whatever that is. It's a really nice way to save yourself a little bit of a headache and processing time and expedite the workflow of your own project. So here's how we do it. We're going to go to Composition, Add to Render Queue. most people are used to going to File, Export, and then like finding, export a movie or whatever. They've changed that in the last few versions of After Effects. So you might be looking at your export and see something different. But fortunately, they have render queue here now at export, but also the way that it used to do this perfectly was through the composition window. It's where I grew up using After Effects, knowing that I needed to go to the render queue here. It used to be called Make Movie down here, but they've changed the language a little bit. So add to render queue. You can do it here, or you can do it under export, add to render queue. Okay, and what that does is it opens up our render queue. And here's a trick: you should put this up here with your composition panel, because look at all those. I'm going to delete those to get them out of the way. Doink. So here's my composition panel, here's my render queue. If I render with this render queue down in my timeline, like say down here where it was when it first came up, then my computer needs to draw these graphics for my screen and also process them for a file that's being output and exported, right? But if I have this guy up here, it blocks that composition window, and so my computer does not have to think about rendering those visuals while it's also rendering them for a file. So it should reduce render times dramatically. It's kind of a nice trick. Someone taught me a little late in the game, and I said, God, where were you when I was first learning this stuff? All right, so to render this movie out, we know we need to call it something. I'll just put it on my desktop for now and call it lower third alpha. All right. Then we don't need to mess with render settings. We do have to go to lossless. So I click on the word lossless. It opens up my output module settings. And just one important place where I need to define my alpha, and that is under my channels. So by default, I'm going to be making an animation or a QuickTime movie or whatever, and it's going to be RGB. But I need RGB plus alpha. That guarantees me that channel will be included, and I will have a transparency around all of that information of the baby footprints and the text. And that's all I have to do. That's it. RGB plus alpha. It all depends on your format and what options you've chosen. If you choose a format that doesn't support alpha channels, then you're not going to have this as an option. So you have to make sure, like for me, I'm doing QuickTime. QuickTime loves alpha. No big deal. So I hit OK, and then render that sucker out. And in a matter of seconds, thankfully, it's not a really heavy project, it'll finish. I'll get the beautiful chime. Bling! There we go. And if I were to just re-import it into here, excuse me, lower third alpha, I'll bring it in. You know what? Here's what I'll do. I will open Times Square. Bingo. Pull my lower third in. Oh, it's bigger. I'll just fit that to the screen for now. And whoosh! There's my baby footprints and the text. And it's got the alpha channel included. If I didn't set it to RGB and alpha and I hit render, this would have come in with a black background. Whatever color your composition background is, basically, is what gets burned into that movie. So there you go. That's that. That file will make your editors happy, or it will make you happy as you move into Premiere or whatever it is, the project you might be working on, where you need graphics with alpha. Enjoy!